It's Overground, a sort of supplementary talk show type podcast to accompany Underwood and Flinch Underground with Mike and Pauline. Hello and welcome to Overground, a podcast that I do occasionally and haven't done for some time because I haven't had any questions about what it is that I do. That's all right, I don't mind. In many ways, it's probably better if I don't get those questions because that way I can't accidentally give away any spoilers. But still, I did get some questions a while ago from a patron, Lisa Morrison. She sent these questions in to me, and I said I'd get onto them as soon as possible, and then didn't get onto them because you know what it's like with email. There's an email there, and you say, okay, there it is. And then after a few days, it's not visible anymore, and you just kind of forget about it because there's other emails come in. But anyway, rhubarb. I've remembered them, and here I am now doing a podcast with Lisa's questions, and with me, as always, is my charming co-host, Pauline.
Hello.
And Pauline, you have Lisa's questions there?
Yes, I do have Lisa's questions.
Okay.
I'll just do a little, she does a little introduction here, and Lisa says, rather than Underwood and Flinch related things, since I know you hate to spoil things, I thought I'd ask you a little bit about how you got started in writing and what your workflow might be like now that you have a semblance of a living from it.
Okay.
So the first question from Lisa is, when did you start writing and why?
When did I start writing and why? Let me think. I suppose, when was it? I suppose I was about, no, that's when I started writing the Hall of Mirror stories and stuff.
You're talking about?
No, just, when I started writing. I suppose when I was a kid, because I started making my own comic books. I was a great fan of comic books. And I just wanted to sort of make my own and sort of draw my own, and and so I used to sort of just, use colouring pens and then staple them all, sheets of paper, staple them together, and say, "Yay, finished comic!" Throw it on the pile and show it to maybe some friends of mine who were obviously not particularly impressed because I wasn't very good. But that was the first thing, and then. What else? I suppose, I made a couple of stabs at writing in my 20s because I kind of always liked the idea of being a writer, but those sort of ideas never really came to anything because I didn't know what it was I wanted to write. I think I kind of like the idea of writing, stories from life or things.
Well, I was just thinking, we met would have been 1993, and I read some of your writing, and the one that really, I read a couple of things you'd written, and the one that really jumped out at me, which I thought was a great story, it's a thing of writing from life, was Give Me 100.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And that was just like, you'd written other stuff, that was okay, but this was like a sudden leap into something because I could really picture it. And that for me was when I really realised, actually, you can write, you're a writer.
I suppose, I used to write for my own amusement, I liked to write stories about people that I met or encountered, like, what was that one? The Hazlitt technique, that was based... The character of Jim Hazlitt was based on a guy I worked with when I was working on the dust carts in Slough. And there was a guy, and he just used to say that sort of thing. I was like, "Oh yeah, I know what you're saying. And I based the character of Jim Hazlitt on him.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. And so it just kind of grew from there. It was a thing that I was interested in doing, and I used to write to amuse myself. Those original Hall of Mirror stories weren't written with any market in mind. They were just kind of written for self-amusement, which I think is actually always a very good thing to write, good motivation to write from,
Oh, yes, like C.S. Lewis always said, didn't he? He said something along the lines of he wrote books because other writers weren't writing the books that he wanted to read, so he had to write them himself. So, you and CS.
Me and CS. Okay, next question.
Okay, so next question from Lisa is, in those early days, how did you approach the novel? I know you started One Among The Sleepless and took the decision to podcast it. What made you decide to do that, and how did you make the word count?
What I did during the sort of the Hall of Mirrors writing, those stories, or rather when I was writing those stories, I should say, I had a few ideas knocking around, and I thought, well, that could be a good story, and that could be a good story, and I realised that a couple of the stories would go together quite well in a larger story. And I sort of mapped out how those stories might evolve. And then I just started writing them, or writing it. What was the other part of the question?
You took the decision to podcast it. What made you decide to do that?
Oh, the podcasting thing came a lot later because obviously I wrote the novel, and at the time I knew that the word count of a novel was, I think it's now 40,000 words. It's dropped quite a lot. It used to be 75,000 words. So I was aiming for 75,000 words, and I surpassed that easily. And I just kept writing and writing and writing and writing until I'd finished it. And then when I'd finished it, I self-published it through digital printing. And I had a couple of boxes of books, and I trudged around local bookstores, offloading copies into shops and all that. And I did that, and wherever it went on sale, I'm happy to say it sold out. And I remember actually I put it in a bookshop in Hove.
Yes.
And there was a little ad which we produced and put it in the window. And I went in a couple of days later and asked the guy in the shop how it was selling, and he said, "Oh, we sold one on the first day." And the woman who bought it, she stayed up all night. Apparently, she came in the next day looking for something else that I'd written, because she stayed up all night to read it from cover to cover, and she was really enthused about it and quite disappointed there was nothing else from me. So I felt it was a really kind of exciting and promising first customer. But that whole thing was actually ultimately a pain in the arse, because when you've got to go trooping around from bookshop to bookshop, every month or 2 months, to try to get the money from the booksellers, say, okay, I'm selling this book, and how many have you sold, and how much, et cetera, et cetera. It's a nuisance, and it doesn't really, it's a lot of shoe leather, and it was only doable on a very small scale. Like, so for example, we were living in Brighton, and there was some on sale in Reading, and there was some on sale in Windsor, where I had connections in the book trade, and I don't even know if I ever got the money from those places.
No, I seem to remember there was a chain in Reading. I don't think they ever.
No, Reading, it was actually.
Should we be actually naming shops? I don't know.
I don't know. It doesn't do any harm. It's not that they withheld the money. It's just that I never kind of got round to getting it. I never sort of chased it. But then again, maybe they did. I don't know. It was a long time ago.
Yes.
But long story short, it was very hard to do that. And so I gave up. I just thought that this is hopeless. It wouldn't have got a publisher. It was too kind of different. And so I forgot about it. And then that was in, 2002?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2002.
And I just gave up and got on with my life. And then in 2000, and I think it was 2006, a friend of mine got in touch, because he knew I'd written the book and he'd read the book. He got in touch with me because he was into podcasts, and he'd listened to some of Scott Sigler's work, and he said, "You could do this. There's this thing called podcasting. All you got to do is get a microphone and just read your book, and then you can give it away for free on the internet." And that's exactly what I did, and the rest is history, I guess.
Yes.
Long answer, sorry, but there's a lot to cover there.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
It's a big question. Right, next question then from Lisa is, how do you approach outlining a plot, and what methods do you use?
I walk about and think about it a lot. I think about it and think about it and think about it and think about it. I use notebooks, like large A4 lined notebooks, ring notebooks I prefer, and I just make copious notes, and I do what are those things called, like
Index cards?
No. I don't use it. You know those kind of the mind maps. There's
Oh, yeah.
there's a word for them.
Yeah.
Spidergrams, mind maps. You draw things in circles and you draw arrows going to other things. And
I can't remember what they're called.
anyway, so yeah, I do that. I just take extensive notes about things and sort of just put this to that, follow each thing through to its logical conclusion, realise that some things can't happen, some things would be cheating. You think, I'd really like the story to go that way, but it actually can't. And so I don't do that, although some people do. God from a machine, Deus ex machina. It's okay, he can fly. It's okay, he's actually got a superpower. But no, I don't. If it can't be done sort of logically, then I don't do it. And of course, within the vampire universe, there is a certain amount of superpower-ness, but it's accepted. It's kind of within the parameters of the mythos. You can't have, for example, someone like Underwood turning into a fish because he needs to get out of a wet situation. That's not doable. But that's basically it. I just map it out in advance. I also use whiteboards. That's a recent addition. Since we've had a house and I've been able to sort of actually screw whiteboards to walls, because previously we'd been renting and things, and I couldn't do that.
Yeah, you can't really nail things to the wall or whatever.
Can't put even a picture on a wall, can you?
No, blue tack or
blue
anything
tack,
like
forget that
no,
shit.
No. Okay, another question here from Lisa. So, I suppose a couple of parts of this question, but I'll read the whole thing, okay?
Yeah.
Were there any particular snags you hit with the production/writing of Underwood and Flynch 1, or at least the most memorable and similarly...
What?
Similarly...
Show me.
It's similarly. I can't say it.
And similarly... Yeah, similar. It's hard, isn't it? And similarly, how has your workflow changed now? Go on, you say it. Similarly. All right, forget about it.
Yeah.
All right.
And similarly, say that word. Hang on, let me just try it again. Oh, it's gone blank on me. Okay. And similarly.
Can you start the question again?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Where Lisa asks, were there any particular snags you hit with the production/writing of Underwood and Flynch 1, or at least the most memorable? And
okay, stop. Let's just go with the first part of the question. Were there any snags I hit with the production of Underwood and Flynch? Not really. Moving house about 3 times.
Yeah, that didn't help.
Over the course of the story. I mean, if you listen to the podcast, you can probably hear the sort of the room sound changes as the podcast moves from place to place,
country to country.
Yeah. So that was always a bit of a pain in the arse. And there was the mid-season or the mid-podcast hiatus, which I took a break, I think, to get ahead of myself in terms of the material I was writing. But no real problems.
No.
What was the similar issue?
How has your workflow changed now since Underwood and Flynch 1 is?
Well, now it's great. We're settled now. Obviously, in the course of Underground, there's been a house move or two, and blood and smoke. But no, it's great. It's really good.
Well, I mean, this is your job now, so you don't have to go into work every day.
Well, exactly.
A different job. So.
I mean, you still get. I'm still, because I'm kind of writing the story as I go. There are still times where I have to walk a lot and map and plan and scribble and take copious notes, because Underground is a very big, complicated plot, and it's leading into, because now of course Underwood and Flynch doesn't have an end. It's not a novel. It moves from kind of a volume to a volume, if you will, and so Underground being a volume doesn't kind of have the typical sort of story arc where it kind of comes to an end and then that's the end of the story and everything's tied up. What it does is it follows the arc of a story, then it reaches a climax, but the climax isn't the end, and it's actually just a new beginning. which is really, really difficult. But at the same time, because I say it's difficult because you don't want to end the story, like, accidentally ended it.
Yeah.
You've got to keep it open, sort of thing, end of
yes,
volume,
yeah.
and then it's going to go into the next one.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that makes the plotting and the planning all the more complex because each story thread in Underground, and there are one, two, three, four, five, about 5 story threads. All those story threads have to be tied up. They each have to come to an end, and they each have to do so in a good way. And all those characters, for better or for worse, have to reach a kind of that place,
Yeah.
And what they do, everything that they do in this story now will have consequences in later stories. And maybe it's, I don't know, is it going to be a 3-novel series? When I say 3-novel, I mean, I'm not counting the Blood and Smoke thing. I'm thinking like Underwood and Flinch Underground, and the third book, Blood and Smoke, and its kind of continuation will be kind of a chronicle, a bit like Disturbing the Devil.
Yes, it's sort of
but it's also an integral kind of link, because of course Blood and Smoke links Underwood and Flinch to Underground.
Their backstory,
it is, yeah. So
their essential backstory.
It's hard. I've forgotten what the question was.
Yeah, no, you've answered a question actually.
Oh, right, I'm just going on.
Has your workflow changed now? And yes, it has.
Yeah, instead of you instead of planning a book, it's a constant stage of planning, and a constant stage of assessing where you are. It's like checking the compass and checking the map, not just for one person, but for all of the people in the story. And knowing what's going to come and making sure that everybody's on the right road and saying and doing the right actions to take them where they necessarily have to go.
Okay, now there's one last question. There's a PS here as well.
Okay,
so
PS.
Cheeky one more question from Lisa here. And she says, you read a lot of H.P Lovecraft stories. Do you plan to write some of your own original horror stories? Underwood and Flinch doesn't feel like a horror anymore.
Horror. Are vampires horror really anymore? Do any vampire stories feel like horror anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, even when you look back at like Christopher Lee, the Dracula movies of the 60s, they were Certificate X back in the day, weren't they?
Well, I'm thinking Interviewed a Vampire was a supernatural story rather than a horror story. I wouldn't have classified it as horror.
No. Well, as I say, also, the Christopher Lee movies, they were Certificate X back in the day. But I think now, if they were to come out on video, they'd probably be a PG.
Yeah.
And what other vampire movies are there, or vampire books?
Oh, I mean, it's those Twilight things and
Well,
that kind of stuff.
they're not horror.
They're not horror at all.
True Blood isn't horror, but it's classified as such. I just don't think vampires scare people.
No, I think people kind of find them intriguing. I think that's, and they say something about the human condition, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and as you say, I suppose the genre really isn't so much horror anymore; it's supernatural.
Yeah, it is supernatural. But are you going to write more horror
stories? Well, obviously, there's After the Plague. That's, I suppose, a horror story. If zombies are still horror anymore.
Yeah, can I just say I really want you to... listeners, I'm really encouraging him to write more After the Plague because I really like that.
Yeah, well...
I want you to write more of that, please.
Yes, well, I'm going to. As you know, you've read the plot outline. And
yes, I have, and it's very good.
You like?
Yeah, I liked it very much.
Okay, so there is After the Plague too. And I suppose I could, amp up the horror element to that, because like all good zombie horror stories, like The Walking Dead, the horror of the story isn't in the zombies, it's in the humans,
it's in the characters,
and what they're prepared to do to each other, and that sort of thing. And that's what After the Plague 2 has in it. It's not like, oh my god, zombies, eat me arm, eat me leg, help get him off.
That is a nuisance, obviously, and it's not very nice if it happens to you. But it's the horror of other people.
Hell is other people, they'd
say.
And Do I plan to write any other stories? Plan? No, I don't plan. But if you get the idea for a story, and you think, oh, that's an interesting idea, and you develop it, and you think, okay, yeah, that's a goer. And if that happens, then I will write it. But I'm not looking for it. My head is focused on Underwood and Flinch, this volume, the next volume, the sequel to Blood and Smoke, the second part of Blood and Smoke, and After the Plague too. Beyond that, I'm not thinking of anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like with Underwood and Flinch. I mean, my understanding of how that came about, I think I was living in Spain.
Yeah.
Pushed that story massively with you.
Yeah.
It wasn't that you were looking for a story, but that popped up, I think.
It did, yeah. I don't know, maybe I've talked about this before, but you certainly know it. But it was inspired at the time by we were living in a small village in Andalusia, and there were lots of British expats living there, and you'd always know them because they'd always be sitting outside the pubs, outside the bars, or inside, usually outside, drinking all day. And very often they'd get together, brought together by a kind of their common, situation.
Language,
their common language and their...
It was a culture beside the Spanish culture, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a kind of a separate culture in a way.
Yeah,
It was,
and they
kind of
kept...
interesting.
It wasn't they kept it to themselves, but it was just, I suppose it's just, a common thing for anybody who's tied by language,
Yeah, I mean, people were very good at integrating, but it's sometimes when you want to have a really good conversation, it's nice to be able to a conversation with someone in your first language, because you can get into more depth. So I think people kind of, like in any culture, they'll get together.
Sure.
But there was two parallel cultures going on there, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That's not to say they didn't integrate.
There was, some people were not mixers. Some people,
That's true.
Some people were very. How can you say it?
In an enclave of
and they didn't mix, and they didn't try to mix. They didn't try to speak the language, and sometimes were very proud of
there for years, and
very proud of not being able to say anything in Spanish. And so I kind of got the idea when we were there of what if there were a vampire who were of a similar frame of mind, who basically would only drink the blood of English people and wouldn't drink the blood of any bloody foreigners.
A Brexit vampire.
And of course, it was a stupid idea. It was just a sort of, just bants, as they say. But so I threw that idea out as soon as I'd said it. But the idea of a vampire, of an English vampire in a Spanish town, like the town that we lived in at the time, stuck. And that became Underwood and Flinch.
Yes, it did. I think that's all of Lisa's.
That's all, ladies and gentlemen. Is there anything else? Did you have any questions about Underwood and Flinch Underground?
Did I have any questions?
Yeah, I'm just putting you on the spot.
Oh, God, I don't know. When's the next episode out?
No, that's a shit question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, can you think of any questions that the listeners may have?
God, I have to get into somebody else's head now.
Last episode, of course, was 22, which was
22, which
was the one with
Valentine,
and Redmond.
Yeah, but I can't really ask questions about the next episode because that they.
Well, no, you
spoilers.
can. We could ask you any questions about the episodes recently. No. Not without spoiling the plot.
No, I can't ask any questions.
No, you can't because you know the answer to everything.
Yeah.
And that's why That's why this podcast depends on questions from you, ladies and gentlemen. So if you do have any questions that don't have necessarily have spoiler sort of answers in them, then do please send them in, and I'll make another episode of Overground. But until then, it's goodbye from me, Mike Bennett, and also from my charming co-host, Pauline.
Goodbye, everyone.
And yes, that's it. Cheerio.
Bye.
Music on the podcast was by Andre Luis. For more information, go to andreluis.com. This podcast has been brought to you today by you. Yes, you, and all my other sponsors at Patreon. Thank you for supporting me, and never forget that everything I produce from now on, be it on paper or on podcast, is as a result of your contribution. I did a mini fist pump there, but obviously you couldn't see it.